Well, when I applied to come here, the only interview I had was in a pub with the three senior members of staff who had already been appointed. So we chatted for an hour and a half over a beer, and that was it. Those were easy days. The only building on campus was the first row of bricks of Eliot College. That was it. Oh, there was Beverley Farm. That was obviously an ancient building standing. But otherwise, it was a naked hillside. Then the Gulbenkian was being worked on quite early on, though I wasn't aware of it at first, by my head of department, Reg Folkes, Professor Folkes, the founding professor of English. He got intrigued by the fact that Leicester University had somehow got a theatre built very cheap. And he thought, if they could do it, we could do it. So he poked around all on his own. The university here wasn't the least interested. It was all down to Reg. And he found it could be done cheaply and that they got a very good architect to do an excellent design. So he chased this up and chased it up. And he got a £30,000 grant from the Gulbenkian Foundation, hence the name of the final place. And at some stage, the university here reluctantly coughed up about another 20,000 quid. So the whole thing was built for about 50,000 quid, which was absurd. And the university sort of didn't quite know what it would let itself in for, because it had all, as I say, all been Reg.
I came to the university in 1965 with my husband, Harry Bloom, who helped set up the law department. And we came down from London, and it was a wonderful atmosphere there because there weren't too many people. It was very intimate. We were very friendly with everybody. He was actually appointed on the committee of the Gulbenkian once it had been more or less built. And he appointed Reg Brown, who was the second director after a very short stay with the first director, who'd put on a play with a nude male. And as I say, in those days, it wasn't even a dumb thing in the West End. And I think the staff, there were a lot of people walked out of that first night. And it was a shock, especially for the VC, Templeman.
Yes, the naked man on stage. Reg Brown told me what it was. From what I remember, that was a satire show, wasn't it?
And I did come to the opening production. It was a bit notorious, really. It was a contemporary play by a playwright called Richard Drane. I don't know what else he wrote. But the play that was chosen to open the Gulbenkian was called The Exploding Dream. And in the standards of the 1960s, it was quite shocking. Now it would appear banal beyond belief, but there was actually some nudity in it. And of course this was outrageous in the 1960s, you know, nudity on the pub. Oh, really? And because it was the opening of the Gulbenkian, it was a big event. And the mayor of Canterbury, Councillor Bertie Buckworth, who I got to know quite well, came to it. And there was a lot of people walked out at the interval, by the way. They just didn't go back for the second half. They thought this was absolutely outrageous, which by the standards of the time it was. But dear old Bertie Buckworth was quite unfazed by it. He was a butcher. He was a Conservative councillor and mayor of Canterbury. He was a butcher. And he was interviewed by the Kentish Gazette afterwards. And the interviewer said, Mayor Buckworth, were you shocked by what you saw? And he just smiled and said, no, he said, I'm a butcher. I've seen lots of flesh. It didn't trouble me in the least.
Gulbenkian started. It was on its own. There was no drama department. Drama department came later. So within about, I don't know, 10 years, I'm speaking a bit vaguely, but something like that. On the one hand, the university was desperate to save money and would think, well, can we really afford the luxury of a Gulbenkian? And so from a financial point of view, it was often hanging by a thread. And this is where, because I was doing a lot of admin at the time, I was probably a dean or something, you know, I'd be called into various committees and try and defend the place. And then you knew, at least I knew, lots of people knew, that secretly the drama department was thinking, hey-ho, if it just drops off the twig, it will fall right into our lap. We'll have our own theatre. That would be nice, wouldn't it? So there was always this kind of fissure between the theatre and the drama board, as it then was. Eventually the drama board got their own sort of chamber theatre, but They still eyed the Gulbenkian enviously. So between the economic pressure and the lack of alignment with the drama board, that was how the place was under attack. And several times, at least on two quite big occasions, there was something like a committee of investigations, say, which says, is the Gulbenkian really worth its salt?
I was made the I was the first information officer of the University of Kent, and I did some magazines called FUSS, Forum for University Staff and Students, and I always felt it was very, very important with the university in its early days, but particularly to bring in the town and gown, and particularly because it had made such an impact on Canterbury having the university here. I remember lots of us, of course, supported the university. We went to the plays there. You know, there was a sort of general feeling of gaiety, and this was a lovely experience for the university, which otherwise was having a fair amount of protest.
My perception was a lot of people from the town were coming up, and I think I noticed in one of our magazines that we brought with us, there was talk about the town gown thing, and the relationships with people from the town, and so a lot of people were coming for a night out. However, when I cottoned on to the students could come for 28p, I thought, well, looked like quite a good deal.
Unlike the commercial theatre and cinemas, it was probably a safe place to put on things that were a bit more avant-garde and a bit off the normal track. So yeah, I think it probably was a good place to put experimental theatre and slightly different foreign language films and things like that might not have got a huge audience down in the town. I really loved film, and we used to come to the films here, and they used to show really good overseas films. So what did I see here? I saw a Catherine Deneuve film called Repulsion, and one with Jean-Paul Belmondo and Alain Delon, called Borsellino, which is a real classic sort of gangster movie set down in Marseille.
I used to do a lot of stage management work here. Yeah, I did 10 shows, usually about one a term, and I also got involved helping out on other shows as well. It was quite different then. There was a lot more student involvement actually in the theatre. I mean, Reg Brown did a lot of work to keep the theatre going and dragged it back from the brink. But it was, I think there was a lot, it was UKC Dramatics was the name of the group that was doing a lot of things here.
One of the great things was that there was enormous amount of enthusiasm for the Gulbenkian, and I think people did support it as much as possible. So I think probably they wanted to have really quality plays come up for the university. You see, Reg wasn't really an academic at all, which was a good thing, actually, I think. But he really respected, the humanities and people's wishes to have really good quality. That was very important to him.
But it was it was quite a dramatic start to the Gulbenkian theatre, and fair enough. Over the years, all sorts of huge variety of performances have been put on. Some have been good and some have been less good, but overall, the Gulbenkian, and then a little later Cinema 3, and then very, very much later the Collier Ferguson and the whole of the cafe. I mean, I've seen that develop piece by piece, and it's a wonderful, wonderful facility.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing that's quite clear is that this university has developed significantly, very much so.
I'd hope it'd still be here. I'd hope it'd still be. It does seem to do quite a bit of outreach work, and involving the local community and being something for all ages. And also one thing we have noticed is the music Hall, the big, what's it called, the Collier? Yeah, that, because there wasn't a music degree or anything when we were here at the time, and there seemed to be the music facilities seem to have expanded.
Yeah, that used to be a lecture theatre, Cornwallis Lecture Theatre.
And so for the arts generally, I think it'd be quite good if it could actually keep going and indeed expand.
Somebody said, what are you protesting about? And the answer is, what have you got? And that was really the attitude at the time.
When the university opened in 1965, it needed to have, almost overnight, a cadre of senior academics. To put it bluntly, if you were going to start teaching physics, chemistry, theology, history, English, you needed professors in those subjects.
I came to the university in 1965 with my husband, Harry Bloom, who helped set up the law department. I was made the first information officer of the University of Kent, and I did some magazines called FUSS, Forum for University Staff and Students, and I always felt it was very, very important with the university in its early days, but particularly to bring in the town and gown, and particularly because it had made such an impact on Canterbury, having the university here. There was a sort of general feeling of gaiety, and this was a lovely experience for the university, which otherwise was having a fair amount of protest because everybody was struggling with the interdisciplinary aspect of the university. It was very experimental. They wanted all the faculties to flow into each other. Nobody really knew how this was going to happen. And we had all sorts of new staff coming all with very different ideas.
The university was run by very senior academics who had an international reputation. And I came in 1968 as, how old was I then? I was 27. So for me, those senior academics were gods, even though I was on the academic staff. That's how it was.
There was a real struggle going on between capital and workers at that point in time, which impacted on the students and the way they thought about the world. And they did see themselves as very much allied to the working class and being part of that struggle. I was in Keynes for the first year. I was resident in Keynes. Keynes was really the focus of a lot of activity. I remember the junior common room and the bar was just continually littered with leaflets and flyers for hustings, for elections, for coaches going to demonstrations, for various debates, for the women's movement, for all kinds of things. There was always something you could join or get involved in Keynes.
So by the time you got to the late 60s, 1970, the phenomenon of the politicisation of the student body was well established. And it came here to the University of Kent almost immediately.
Looking back on it, it was more of a cultural, in fact you could even demean it to be a fashionable climate, but the cultural climate was a political climate, so therefore we were protesting about everything all the time. And the famous occupation of 72, when somebody probably else has already told you, but the students occupied the building, and I was one of those people. Not necessarily proud of it today.
Reports came out that university authorities were keeping information on student records, student files, about political affiliation and political actions. So word spread around the campus that the University of Kent kept secret files on students which detailed any known political affiliation, any known political action. Now that was serious, and the students, in my view, were quite right to get worked up about it. And at first the university took a paternalistic attitude, falling back on, as I explained a moment ago, well, we are in loco parentis. It's not for you to ask us what information we've got on you. We are responsible for you in law. We can keep whatever information we want, which wasn't helpful because it was a real issue. But the Students' Union suddenly discovered the sit-in. And so the student files became the subject of the first serious student protest. The whole building, of course, was under occupation because the students had commanded, they managed to keep pretty well every single room open. They set up, there were banners at the windows, there were enormous numbers of students all around here, with placards, down with the university, down with secret file. Should I say this? Yes, I will. For the sit-in lasted for 2 weeks. The students occupied the whole of this bit of the campus for 2 weeks.
And it was something to do with student files at Essex. Have you heard about it? There were these rumours that there were all these secret student files at Essex University. It kicked off there, that we weren't allowed to see. And so I'm sure it was all perfectly innocent. But anyway, we made it into a great big thing. And we occupied one of the university buildings and wouldn't let anybody else in. And I can't remember which one it was now because it was so long ago. And we had rallies and speeches, and we got all sorts of very radical people down from London. And I remember somebody saying that democracy is never won by democratic means, and we all cheered and had a lovely time. And then it got to the Easterfication, and we all went home, of course, so it sort of petered out. So I think in the end we got to see our files, and I think some of that, the kind of resistance to authority generally, the refusal to take the word of anybody for anything, always question everything, curiosity, Star Trek, to boldly go where no one went before, So I think that's still with me, really. And I learned it all here. So
I think that was what university was meant to be about. I mean, in those days, or that's especially those of us perhaps who came, I don't know, more from the social sciences, I don't know. But I think there was a general idea that universities were about critical thinking, about challenging the status quo, about thinking about new ways of doing things.
Well, I think students come to the university to protest, don't they, about life generally, And so I think that sort of thing is important in a university, that they are allowed to protest and things. And it was just the way they obviously conduct themselves. I think they felt that some of the protests, like when my husband was when staff were prevented in going into their buildings to teach, that wasn't acceptable. They were, they were almost manhandled, so that was too extreme.
Well, the big one was the Joe Cotter affair, where he was effectively discharged from the university by the humanities, the Dean of Humanities, I think it was, and that caused a major sit-in. This was in 73.
The other one a bit later was for a sort of rogue student who'd been off for a whole term, lived in London, was being sent down for this because he just hadn't been around. And there'd been a little commission of inquiry into his case, and it was agreed to be sent down. Joseph Cotter was his name. Anyway, because he was a friend of the powers that be in the student union, he got vigorously defended. They said this terrible injustice has been done to this student.
I can't remember which year it was, but it was about a guy called Joe Cotter. He was a student who'd been sent down. And I'm not sure exactly what the reason was. We thought it was because he hadn't attended lectures and seminars. But anyway, there was a massive sit-in. and I think it was the Senate building, I can't remember if it was the Senate building that they took over. And it was all very exciting, of course.
Basically, they were saying that they didn't follow the correct procedure to kick him out of the university, where the students were. And the sitting just went on and on. I can't remember how long for. It got bad enough that when I went to lectures, the lecturing staff said, if you don't come out of the Cornwallis, I'm going to stop lecturing to you lot. So there was a big meeting, and I can't remember if it was in Elliot or Rutherford. Do we come out of do we stop the sitting or not? And the other problem that's happening with the third years, because I was in second, it would have impacted onto their finals. So there was a massive cohort of third year students there to say, come out, because I don't want my finals messed up.
The authorities have threatened to close the university down, and some of the teaching staff have stopped lecturing already. But then my comment here is, isn't it terrible that so few people can cause such a lot of trouble? So although I was obviously finding it really interesting, I was a bit concerned because I think I was one of the people that was in my final year.
Our union president at that time, John McGowan, gave quite a speech, and but in the end the vote went, you've got to come out of the Cornwallis. They'd recorded the whole meeting, and they then replayed the John McGowan speech, and it was quite an impressive speech. I was thinking, yeah, why did we come out? We shouldn't have come out. He was a very good speaker. I think the student union got quite a bill for the damage in the building. Joe Cotter got reinstated and passed his degree. There was a running joke that scientists have labs to do their practicals in. The Cornwallis is there for the social science and humanities to do their practicals in.
I actually covered in my Fuss magazine anything that was controversial. Yes, I got people to write about it and put it in the magazine. So I like to hear I was in favour of protest because or things that were wrong, because that's what the magazine was for, forum for university staff and students.
A university should be an open place where all ideas are debated and challenged and defended. And if that's done properly, eventually, in the long run, good ideas will survive and bad ideas will drop by the wayside.